welcome back to the Happy Saver podcast. I'm Ruth, a personal finance blogger here in Aotearoa. And have you ever wondered about other people and their money? Well, in this podcast, I chat with a diverse bunch of just everyday people. I learn their stories about their financial experiences, and then I share helpful, relatable information from those Kiwis who have generously explained how they handle their money in New Zealand. Today's episode is an update episode of North Island couple Chris and Rosemary. Their first episode came out in March of 2021 and it was number 49, and I titled it, Everything I Thought I Knew About Money Was Wrong. Today they are aged 37 and 38 respectively. And if you've not listened to their first episode, we'll just pause this one, go back and check it out because it's going to provide a lot more context for today. But I'll recap just a little bit to get started. In mid-2020, 33-year-old Chris, he sent me an email that began like this. Ruth, unintentionally, you've brought me on a journey of financial awakening, and I love the Happy Saver, but I hate it too. Via my podcast, he had stumbled upon the FIRE movement, and he was wondering if it was some sort of cult, so clearly I had some explaining to do. So you better believe that when I get an email like that, I'm bracing for impact. Chris went on to tell me that it all started in mid-2020 when he and his 34-year-old partner Rosemary were, he said, happily living paycheck to paycheck when he made the fatal mistake of Googling the words financial podcast. Well, up popped this very podcast and he thought to himself, well, yep, that sounds like me. I'm happy, my life is pretty cool, and I'm a good saver. I've got about 15 grand in the bank and a good wee beekeeping business on the side. So this podcast sounded right up his alley. That was until he was a few episodes in, at which point he told me he was a mixture of emotions: excitement, confusion, anger, shame, and nervousness. By my standards, they had a lot of mahi to do. Plus, he had a million questions pinging around in his head about how he has been handling money up until now, and he had decided that it was all about to change. Well, that was the start of our long-running email exchange and the beginnings of Chris and his partner Rosemary's journey. Since then, we have kept in touch, and today's episode is an update of where this couple are today with both money and life, and it's safe to say that they have absolutely transformed their situation, and I hope that this episode lights a fire under those listening and prompts you to reach for a few stretch goals, whatever they might be. Over the last 4 years, Chris sent me some pretty epic emails as he went on a major deep dive into learning about personal finance. And I just sat on the sidelines watching him get Rosemary on the same page. They have since both utterly transformed their financial lives as they embarked on a new journey to financial independence. And it's pretty safe to say, yep, they've joined the cult. So today's episode, it won't disappoint, I promise. These two are not mucking around. But before I get started, I keep giving Pocketsmith the option to opt out of supporting the Happy Saver, but either they're just far too nice to say no, or they genuinely are one of the nicest companies I've ever worked with. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about today's sponsor. When I first started to get interested in understanding where my money came from and went to, I meticulously noted each transaction in a spreadsheet. While a good place to start, I was short on time, and that practice lasted 1 month at best. Enter Pocketsmith. It helped me quickly automate my finances, which saved a ton of time. I like to explain Pocketsmith to people by saying it gave me the data I desperately needed to understand my money. I no longer have to compile that data, it does everything for me. Pocketsmith automates financial management by connecting to your financial institutions, such as your bank, for real-time transaction updates. Plus, it offers budgeting tools, cash flow forecasts, and net worth tracking, thus eliminating the need for manual spreadsheets. Thank goodness. If you want to supercharge your finances with Pocketsmith, have we got a deal for you. Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of Pocketsmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/the Happy Saver. That's pocketsmith.com/the Happy Saver. Having now created 95 plus episodes, I'm grateful that I've managed to stay in touch with many of the people I've interviewed. And when I think of Chris, I think of the guy just heading into the orchard to pick apples to make a bit of cash, who by pure chance stumbled upon the Happy Saver and that kicked off a massive amount of change for him and Rosemary. Out of the blue, I'll often get an email from Chris, and he recently sent me a brief 7,000-word update of what's been occurring in their lives more recently. Chris said it's difficult to appreciate how far they've come because it's painful to reflect on where they used to be just a short time ago. And it was the first COVID lockdown in early 2020 when he first Googled those fateful words, financial podcasts. Thinking a podcast on money might be interesting, he rapidly worked his way through 40 episodes of this podcast, and they all challenged what he thought he knew about money. Each and every person I had interviewed contributed something to his knowledge, and it lit a fire in him to learn more. So, in quick succession, he started reading what happened to be the books that I actually recommend the most: The Simple Path to Wealth, The Richest Man in Babylon, Playing with Fire, and Everyday Millionaires. He discovered what he believed his and Rosemary's standout problem was, that they didn't have a goal to focus on and aim for. Until this point, he'd been learning alone, but at about this time he did invite Rosemary in, knowing that he couldn't go far without her buy-in and her by his side. And he said it took a bit of work because, after all, he struggled to present to her financial concepts that he didn't yet fully understand himself, but he got there. Having absorbed so much new information so fast, and in the absence of a clearly defined goal, they actually felt a bit lost before they even began, and Chris said that they became strangely loyal to performing the daily trivia of life. Money comes in, money goes out, while they dwelled on their situation, and they began to mull over and formulate a bit of a plan. Now, forming a team didn't happen smoothly, he said, but it did happen progressively over the best part of a year. But by March of 2021, which was right about the time I interviewed them both, they were on the same page and moving in the same direction. And talk about synergy, where the cooperation of two people provides a combined effect far greater than the sum of their separate effects. When they go in, they go all in. So this for me was a first, but this couple has a joint mission statement that he shared with me, and it reads, "We are working towards financial independence by living with intentionality and purpose, investing 50% of our income into index funds. Our goal is to FIRE before we are 50, allowing us the opportunity to pursue meaningful work that ignites our passions with the freedom and flexibility to contribute to endeavours we feel are worth our time." So, united, they forged ahead, and one of their first goals was to get Rosemary's career on track and his teaching degree underway. They did a stock take. Neither of them had any debt, each had a little money saved, but they just didn't have that much to show for all of their toil, and apart from KiwiSaver, they didn't have a clear idea about how to grow the money that they did have. But as soon as they switched their focus from spending to saving, things changed rapidly. By about mid-2021, having both radically cut spending and started saving, Chris's net worth had greatly increased and just rolled over $100,000, with about $40,000 of that amount in KiwiSaver with fund provider Simplicity. He was winding back his beekeeping business in preparation for studying, selling his ute, and funneling the profits into two kernel index funds, the Global 100 and the New Zealand 20. By that time, Rosemary had been working hard too and had about a $140,000 net worth that was made up of $9,000 in KiwiSaver, which was also with Simplicity, plus an $80,000 term deposit that was about to mature, plus some individual shares with Mercury and Meridian. Although they were running largely separate finances, they were working more as a team, and their combined net worth was about $240,000, with a joint flat account for shared expenses, plus a shared $15,000 emergency fund. Now, they had calculated a FIRE number of $1,300,000, and now that they had equipped themselves with a shared goal of making work optional before they were 50, well, they set about applying the principles and practices of FIRE. For those new to the concept of a FIRE number, firstly, FIRE means financial independence, retire early. This is the amount they intend to have invested in large, low-fee index funds, which they would then sell 4% of each year in retirement, giving them passive income of $52,000 a year. By this stage, he said, they thought that they had already psychologically won and were progressively moulding and shaping their lives to create a prosperous future together. Now, I often talk about just deciding to change, and these two absolutely did that. In hindsight, he said that they may have been overconfident with what they could achieve in a day, but underestimated what they could achieve in a decade. And as you'll see in a moment, although they have gone about things differently than planned, they've still done far better than they ever could have imagined. They moved to where the work opportunities were and relocated to Northland, where Rosemary started as a technical assistant working towards becoming an ultrasound technician, and Chris transitioned from a campus student to remote learning and continued chipping away at his teaching degree. Plus, he picked up a job driving the local school bus, which supplemented his small student allowance. He received about $120 to $130 a week in the first 2 years, but as soon as he was married, he was means tested, and because of Rosemary's income, he actually became ineligible to receive a student allowance. Now that they were working from a stronger financial standpoint, with good incomes coming in, everything hummed along nicely, he said. Even when their car, which had 260,000 Ks on it, conked out and was deemed uneconomic to repair, they didn't even flinch, reaching instead into the emergency fund to replace it. But they didn't just buy the first thing they saw. Instead, Rosemary took the bull by the horns and researched, found and negotiated what they thought to be a once-in-a-lifetime deal over the course of a week. Now, within just a week, they were back on the road, driving a 2016 Toyota Aqua Hybrid with 47,000 Ks on the clock for only $9,000. Having the emergency fund ready and waiting gave them huge confidence to fix their own problems. No car loans here. And given they drained their emergency fund, replenishing it became their primary goal, and within just a few short months they had restocked it fully to their chosen balance of $10,000. Now, the car gods were not done with them yet though, and just a few months later, their new sweet ride was stolen and written off. But fortunately, they were insured, and pretty quickly they were able to repeat what he called their refined car sales optimization strategies to secure yet another good deal. And this time it was a 2012 Toyota Aqua with 62,000 Ks on it for $8,000. They said that it's safe to say their emergency fund has had a workout, and I was just delighted to hear that this episode was an inconvenience, not a crisis. Now, remember I said he was selling his ute? Well, in true Mr. Money Mustache style, given they were now a one-car whānau, he had switched to cycling. But given they each worked in opposite directions and they now lived in a hillier area, he bought a $5,300 quality e-bike with cash, which they estimate saved them about 2,500 kilometres of car journeys yearly, saving a whopping $1,100 in annual fuel costs, plus all the additional costs of a second vehicle. Now, although he admitted that it's still a liability and it will go down in value, it's still a better option for them. The savings are worth it, plus it keeps them fit at the same time. So by the end of 2021, they had significantly cut their annual expenses to just $34,000. And the main costs were $18,600 on rent, $6,300 on food, and the e-bike accounted for $5,300. They said that cutting one's expenses this low in pursuit of fire is not something they would recommend for anyone, but for them, it made complete sense. They were both working to bring in income in various ways. Chris received that small student allowance, worked part-time when he could, and he actually also drew on a student loan to cover expenses. In their first year, they went hard at it, achieving a 59% savings rate, even while one of them was studying. It's safe to say that they were quite amazed at their progress, and I'll come back to the student loan soon, but essentially, they used the student loan to cover their living expenses, and they invested as much of the income they made as they could. In his second year at university, it was much more relaxed, and he conveniently taught at the same school where he was paid to drive the school bus, while Rosemary was still the main breadwinner. So after going from 0 to 100 miles an hour in their first year, they eased off on their fire journey in their second year and welcomed some lifestyle inflation into their lives by moving into a more comfortable rental in a more convenient location. But life was still busy, and they ensured they enjoyed some frugal fun with like regular fishing adventures, walks along the beach, plenty of camping trips, tennis, bushwalking, mountain biking, and just spending quality one-on-one time together. And most importantly, after the frenzy of the first year gave way to a calmer second year, they were still working together as a team and continuing to build upon the foundations that they were creating. He said that then and now they don't see FIRE as a financial movement. It's more a life philosophy movement where it just so happens that money plays an important role. For them, FIRE is a lifestyle choice, and they have found that they don't have to spend a lot of money to be happy, but money is still a tool to live a more satisfying life. And if they can manage it well, it will set them up well in the years ahead. Having been together since 2017, in mid-2022 they fully combined their finances and opted for a more simplified banking system with just 2 accounts, an everyday account and a beekeeping business account. The everyday account also doubles as a 3-month emergency fund where they maintain a balance above $10,000, and the remainder of their emergency fund sits in a Kernel 32-day notice saver account. The balance of that cheque account rarely sinks below $10,000 for more than a few days, and it provides enough peace of mind and liquid cash for when things go wrong. Chris is still a beekeeper, but he has simplified and restructured the business to provide enough cash flow to support itself and supplement their holidays. Now, this is a huge change from not having a clear understanding of the money that it used to make. Today, he has 12 beehives with the intention to grow it to a manageable 24, which would generate an income of about $4,000 a year after expenses and taxes. Now, he wants to do this slowly and create happy bees that supply honey and a sustainable income stream. He keeps this money in its own account, which used to have a balance of only about $500, but it now holds a balance of about $3,300, and this increased amount is working well for him. It's good to have that cash buffer, he said. As 2022 drew to a close and 2023 arrived, things were looking pretty great. Their relationship grew stronger. It was the perfect time to get married, and they envisaged a laid-back, easygoing wedding in a small church on a local beach on a hot summer's day with a maximum budget of just $5,000. And slowly, they pulled it all together, and their 50 guests celebrated these lovebirds tying the knot. They swam at the beach both before and after the ceremony, and all of their guests contributed a plate of food or something for the barbecue. Everyone helped out in some small way to either set up or clean up, and in the end, it set them back just $2,900. And to me, this sounded like the perfect wedding. The financial wrap-up of 2022 showed that their annual expenses had risen to $52,600, which is $18,000 higher than the year before. Now, their nicer home cost them $22,300 in rent, but those 2 new cars brought the annual vehicle total up to $10,231 after insurance ins and outs. Their next biggest expenses were their honeymoon and prepaying a future trip to Japan, both costing $9,700, and annual food costs were lower at just $4,100. Having never tracked a thing before, these two are now natural at tracking where their money goes, and this is such a useful exercise to consistently do. Despite their increased annual expenses, their incomes allowed them a 46% savings rate, and it didn't even feel like they were pushing it, he said. Leading up to their wedding, they worked hard, working overtime when offered, and Chris picked up a summer truck driving job to supplement their income. The honeymoon I mentioned was a bargain find, which was a last-minute cruise out of Australia, plus a few weeks exploring Australia. The next financial challenge they had coming their way was one that required 9 months of financial planning. That was the birth of their first child. After getting over the initial excitement and nervousness of what lay ahead, Chris's brain went into overdrive, researching the costs of having a baby, which was a new unknown. How much would a pram be? What's a cot worth? How about a car seat and nappies? How many and how much? He said that the road to parenthood was quite the journey, so rewarding, a little bit intimidating, and enough to keep any man on edge as he prepared to be the best husband he could be to support Rosemary and then become the best dad he could be. Where once he went on a steep learning curve about money, well, his teaching studies kind of got put to the side as he also read every book about pregnancy and infant development. Impending parenthood gave him a new perspective on where his priorities lay, and it also taught him to ease back and enjoy the ride. Their baby arrived in 2023, greeted by 2 parents who were as prepared as they could be, and they said that they are now convinced that babies are as expensive as you allow them to be. During the pregnancy, they acquired or were gifted from family, friends, and secondhand networks all the new and used baby gear that they needed. They were surprised that in many cases, the price tags were still attached, meaning people were selling or regifting things they bought but never used. Good marketing makes new parents feel that they need things as a necessity, but are really just a luxury that is often unnecessary, they believe. Instead, they focused on the basics of raising a baby: plenty of love, a good place to sleep, and their nutritional needs met. From conception to turning 1, they have calculated that their child has cost them just $1,139. They use reusable nappies and make their own baby food, saving a fortune at the supermarket, he said. Taking this approach has meant that they have room in their budget to think about their child's financial future too, and they have already started investing on their behalf. At 6 months old, their infant had a net worth of $1,023. Before they even left the hospital, they had submitted the paperwork required to get their baby their own IRD number, meaning they could immediately sign them up with Colonel and start investing in their Global 100 index fund. When they talk about time in the market, not timing the market, this is what they mean. You won't ever hear their tamariki say, "Oh man, I wish I'd started investing younger." After their child arrived, they were both able to spend a lot of time as a whānau of 3, with Rosemary taking time off work and Chris still studying and working part-time. He feels really happy that they could spend so much time together. And they settled into life and were really happy with their rental property and their landlord. They intended to stay for a few years and they spent $500 creating and planting a vegetable garden, and they prepared to settle in long term. They had always planted gardens in the past, but never stayed long enough to reap what they sowed, but this time would be different. In the 9 months build up to the birth, they had built up a really good safety net of cash savings while also investing, to allow them to take whatever time they needed to adjust to having a child. And he said that it was really important that he mentions that the strings they are pulling today to support their whānau would have been unfathomable before they discovered, this is very kind of them, the happy saver, and were living pay to pay. They've come a long way on their fire journey, but when you work together on a common goal and you've got a clear vision for your money, well, you create options, Chris said. I referenced that he took out a student loan for his teaching degree. In the first episode, he had calculated his student loan debt would be about $25,000 by the end of his 3-year course. He was very much questioning how he was going to pay for his degree. Over the last 3 years, of 2021 to 2023, he has worked the summer breaks, driven the local school bus, taken income from the beekeeping business, and received a student allowance for 2 of the 3 years. Plus, of course, they had Rosemary's full-time income as well. He admits that all of these income sources would have more than covered his costs, but he chose to take out a student loan, which actually totaled $28,000 at the end of his course. As part of this total, he took out the $1,000 course costs as well, money they immediately invested into a Colonel Index fund. So what's the rationale here, you might ask? It is because student debt is interest-free while you remain in New Zealand. And the theory goes that you can borrow money at no interest, invest it, and earn investment returns on it. There are 2 huge assumptions here: that the share markets will go up and that the government doesn't reintroduce interest to student debt. So they committed to a plan of living off the interest-free student loan debt while investing as much of their combined income as they could. He did point out that he knew he had little to no chance of convincing me of his reasoning in this department, and he'd be quite right. It's a huge risk they took, and it flies in the face of the theory of don't put money in the share market you might need within the next 5 or so years. Not to mention the ethics of using government money loaned for an education to instead invest. The theory is good, but life often gets in the way of a good mathematical plan, as does a government set on changing rules. I've seen a lot of people end up with a student debt and no invested money to show for it. However, given I now know quite a bit about the personalities of both Rosemary and Chris, I have to say that if anyone is going to pull this off and keep a spreadsheet to prove it, it might be them. Time will tell. So, how does he intend to pay back his $28,000 student loan? Already, it is being paid back at the rate of 12%, which is a compulsory deduction from any income he makes. As of September 2024, the balance sits at $20,400. The loan has an ongoing admin cost of $60 per annum, and currently, given they have no desire to work abroad and no government has added interest to it yet, it remains interest-free. But he didn't just leave it there, and he wanted to explain his reasoning so you can appreciate how he is justifying the use of a student loan as an investment tool. Firstly, he sees himself as a good steward of their wealth, and he has a clear plan for their money. While living off their student loan money over the last 3 years, they have made consistent and regular investments into their kernel investment account from their take-home pay, from their work, and he feels that he can manage his student debt better than the government can. Since starting university, their portfolio as a whole has generated a 13% return. In very rough math, $28,000 earning 13% is a $3,640 return. Taxes would need to be deducted from that return. Now, I consider they are pulling a lot of levers and taking on risk for this potential return. Also, the math is just not that streamlined, as they didn't put a lump sum of $28,000 in the market 3 years ago, but have dollar cost averaged it in over the last 3 years, so the actual returns would be different. He said that now that he is working as a provisional teacher, he can start contributing back to society and the taxpayer who has provided him with this fantastic opportunity, at the same time that he sends 12% of each paycheck to his student loan. He estimates it'll be gone by 2027. So yes, he said that he is making money at the taxpayer's expense, and yes, he is allowing inflation to eat away at the balance, but he feels his contribution to his investments will pay dividends, his contributions to the debt from his wages will lower the balance, and his contributions to society, where, as a teacher, he is already teaching his students the importance of good financial management, will be good for his students too. He believes he has made a calculated and intentional plan and is in the process of actioning that plan. As I said, if anyone can pull it off, it's likely to be Chris, but I do want to point out that when I hear of an 18-year-old suggesting this strategy, I have some very well-founded concerns. And as I said, most I know end up with a student loan and no money. They might invest some money, but most don't know how to invest in the first place. I also commonly see people sell off investments at the end of study so they can travel, meaning they have no investments and a student loan that they pay 3.9% interest on if they leave New Zealand for longer than 6 months. Now, this interest rate is actually rising to 4.9% from the 1st of April 2025, and you might want to tell your ex-student friends who have travelled overseas that this is happening, by the way. So all that to say, it has risks. Now back to their story. At the completion of his studies, this whānau of 3 took a family trip to Japan to introduce the newest addition to the family to Rosemary's relatives. Japan is not a cheap place to visit, but he was keeping an eye on their investments while they were away, and it was then that they realised that during the month they were away, the dividend income and capital gains that came in from their investments actually exceeded what they had spent on the whole holiday. And this was a reassuring sign that the plan they had been actioning for a few years now was actually working. And this was despite some volatility in the share markets throughout this time. So to sum up 2023, their annual expenses cost $46,000, with the biggest expenses being rent of $20,400, car costs of $7,200, food of $6,500, plus some additional expenses of about $6,200. Their investments returned a healthy 11% return in 2023. They maintained a 39% savings rate, which is an excellent achievement. He said that life over the last 3 years hasn't even come close to that poor student syndrome that you hear spoken about. Instead, for him, the opposite is true. But only if you work as a team and have a well thought through and calculated plan for your money. And I think that being an older student helps a whole lot too. But Chris and Rosemary don't really follow the standard rules and consider themselves different to most couples. They've bent a few rules, but hope that by sharing them, they might leave a path for others to follow. As another new year dawned, they took some time to discuss their goals, and Chris clearly remembers Rosemary uttering the R word for the very first time: real estate. Now this got him thinking. He said he loves index funds. They do their job and they're so easy to manage, and you don't even have to think about them. And since beginning to invest this way, they've had a 13% year-on-year return. But real estate, really? He just thought that it sounded like a lot of hard work with heaps of moving parts, which would take up too much time he would rather spend with his whānau. But Rosemary pointed out that she would really like them to own their own house by the time their child turns 10. Still not quite sure where his response came from, he said, well, yep, that's a goal, and it is ambitious, but it lacks a challenge. Let's become freehold landowners before they turn 5 years old. Having resisted real estate up to this point because they moved around quite a bit, when you have a child, everything changes and you want stability and continuity and a home of your own where they can attend the same school, keep the same friends, and live in the same neighbourhood. So it was agreed within the next 5 years they would own their own whare, one house on one street in one suburb in Whangarei. Now they had to work out how to make their goal a reality. They wrote it down and created a vision board detailing exactly what they wanted in a property. Then magically, and no less than a fortnight later, Rosemary secured her dream job, earning $80,000 a year as a sonographer in training. The catch was that they needed to be Auckland-based for 1 year, and she started in a month. Just like that, in pursuit of their goal, everything changed. It looks like the future tenants will get to enjoy the vegetables they planted because these two were on the move again. And it was crazy times, Chris said, but the ball had started rolling. It occurred to Chris that if they are going to be in Auckland for a year, that they could have a house built for them while they were gone. They immediately began to shop around house building companies, doing their due diligence, and they settled on G.J. Gardner, building a home for $782,000, including the land. Now, I don't mind giving GJ a bit of a mention because that's the company that I once worked for. It was important that the build stay under that $800,000 mark so that they could be eligible for the now scrapped government Homestart grant of $10,000 each. The last thing a trainee sonographer and newly registered teacher needed as they kickstarted their careers in the big smoke was managing a house build. So, after choosing and buying a section, making all the layout and design decisions they needed to make, they paid their 10% deposit and they left them to it. The crazy thing is, he said, is that the section they chose was pretty much exactly what they'd put on their vision board. You know, he said, that section on the outskirts of town, at the top of a hill, overlooking the harbour, at the end of a cul-de-sac, down a long right-of-way with reserve on two sides, north-facing, 280-degree views. Plus, it was one of the cheapest sections available. Currently, the house should be complete by April or May 2025. Her Auckland training will finish at the end of 2024, and their intention is to relocate to Whangarei to a short-term rental until their house is finished. And this will enable him to settle into a new school and her to start her new job. The transition to Auckland was very swift and somewhat manic, as they both frantically packed up their lives and moved. Once there, Chris was looking after their child whilst also looking for a teaching job, and Rosemary immediately began working. Chris is still somewhat incredulous that this is their reality, just 4.5 short years after listening to something as simple as a podcast about money. The way they have gone on to structure their finances has provided them with an unbelievable amount of freedom and opportunities that they've been fortunate enough to harness at the right times. They have options. They have choice, he said. And he said, Ruth, let me provide you an example. Pre-Happy Saver days, it was nice, shiny, fancy toy. Okay, into the trolley it goes, off to the checkout we go. Post-Happy Saver, and a few financial lessons later, it's, okay, here's a good opportunity, but is this as good as we think? Are there similar deals? Do we really need this? Is this in line with our goals? Is this a need or just a want? They've got far greater insights into how to utilise money now. But it doesn't mean everything's perfect, and their rushed transition to Auckland took its toll, especially when, as well as Rosemary working, she also began more tertiary study, working towards her master's, all of which is paid for by Te Whatu Ora, and Chris also secured a teaching job earning $60,000 a year. Now, getting up at 4 a.m. to plan classes, then commute to drop Rosemary off at her work, baby off at daycare, and then off to work for an 8:30 a.m. start, it was taking a toll. 3 hours a day of commuting will do that to you. All three would arrive home at 6 o'clock, absolutely shattered, hungry, drained. So they bit off more than they could chew and severely underestimated the busyness and chaos of Auckland, meaning they barely saw each other. They needed to pivot because this was not a sustainable way to kickstart their careers. So they upped again and moved closer to Rosemary's workplace, and Chris quit his job and he stayed at home with their child for 2 full months, dipping into their emergency fund, because this is what it's for, to cover the shortfall in income. He then returned to a teaching position and is now fully engaged in work. Rosemary can now walk to work, Chris is close to his, daycare is available, and they are close to parks and shops and what have you. They've found a far better fit, he said. They currently pay $600 a week for a 2-bedroom townhouse in a block of 12. Rosemary said it's pretty basic as a build, but it's not for long, and it's all that they need for now. You may be wondering how they afforded Auckland rent whilst also building a house. Well, I've mentioned a few times that since 2020, they had focused on a high savings and investing rate using index funds, individual company shares in Meridian and Mercury Energy, which they actually regretted buying since learning so much more about index fund investing. They use KiwiSaver provider Simplicity and index fund provider Kernel, and these two, who had only really started investing in 2020, had not been playing around. They invested a lot of money in a short period of time, growing their index funds and KiwiSaver combined balance to over $500,000, meaning that in 2023, they had created themselves quite a few options. With their cash in the bank, etc., their net worth was even higher than this amount. So yeah, you did hear that right. With a very high investment rate, plus share market growth and reinvested dividends, their net worth grew rapidly. So they used their incomes to pay rent in Auckland, but to afford their new home, they initially sold $410,000 of their index funds. Next, they repeated the process, selling about $95,000 of their KiwiSaver, and each of them applied for and received the $10,000 First Home Kickstart grant. And they were extremely lucky that they got this money at all, because 3 days after it was confirmed that they could receive their $10,000 each, the government scrapped this grant with no warning, leaving a lot of first-time homeowners, just like Rosemary and Chris, high and dry. But this gave them sufficient cash all up of $525,000 to buy the section outright, pay the deposits on the home build and secure the build contract, and significantly lower any mortgage that they might need. And now they are saving their socks off to put as much cash towards their build as they can so that they can reduce their lending. Their intention was to use Simplicity for a mortgage, as they have some of the best rates available, and they said that they make paying it back easier than a regular bank. But because in their rush to secure the section and house build, they had technically already paid for their section in full, they were no longer considered first home buyers. So they were a bit gutted to hear this technicality. Undeterred, they secured a mortgage via New Zealand Home Loans, and they have a lending limit up to $250,000. But these two have little to no intention of spending that amount. Instead, when we spoke, they are aiming to borrow $100,000 maximum, and they intend to have this paid off within 18 months of moving in, earlier if they can. They just want to tick own our own home off their list and get back to investing. While they are saving so aggressively for a house, they've paused all investing other than their KiwiSaver. So once the mortgage is gone, they will return to aggressively investing with Kernel in their Global 100 fund, building back what they sold. Having drained the majority of their investments, including Rosemary's individual company shares, it left them with assets of about $80,000, made up of a mixture of cash, which they are keeping mostly in their Kernel savings account, KiwiSaver, which remains in a high growth fund, and Kernel index funds. Plus, their emergency fund remains untouched. They felt lucky and fortunate that they had created themselves this opportunity to come up with such a huge deposit on their own home. They credit bloggers and podcasters Mr. Money Mustache, Choose FI, and yours truly with helping them squeeze every cent out of this opportunity. But, and I suspect you knew this was coming, while I'm extremely impressed with the mahi they've put in during the last 4 brief years to build up such a substantial mix of investment, I'm not quite so sure about their choice to sell it all. And he knew this, saying, "Now I know exactly what's going through your mind, Ruth. Never invest money in the share market that you intend to spend in the short term." And yep, that is exactly what I was thinking. Put simply, he said that their dream was moving faster than they were. Their goal to own their own house was only a few weeks old by this stage, and when they logged on to Kernel and Simplicity and they saw the balances of each had grown, he said that they just looked at each other and they said, "Sell." Collectively, they felt that all the stars had aligned, bringing their brand new goal of home ownership right into their hands, which did happen to come at the expense of their previous goal of FIRE using index fund investing. They were aware that what they had done was in stark contrast to the common advice they hear in the financial independence space. Chris said he would never recommend anyone not having a plan, timing the market, and liquidating long-term savings in an effort to secure their shiny dreams that remain in their infancy. But what can he say, except so far they've been extremely fortunate. Now, I don't have an opinion on whether they did the right or the wrong thing, because I know that the road to financial independence is many and varied, and none of us can really never say never. Once again, math and life collide, and we each get to decide what we want to do with our money. Whenever I hear someone being really dogmatic and steadfast with their opinions on money, I'm always keen to hear from those people a few years down the line to see how those strongly held beliefs pan out. And they are really exactly as they envisage, and that's called life. And just to prove that tracking your net worth on the first of each new month works, Chris had been diligently tracking their expenses and updating the balance of their investments, and he could clearly see that something wasn't right between March to April of 2024. $140,000 seemed to have vanished. Well, they quickly tracked it down to where it was sitting in their conveyance's trust account in readiness for their build. What I liked about this and why I share it is how they identified a shortfall and immediately worked out why. He said that their putia has become a lot more manageable to track, as everything is in one of 4 places now: KiwiSaver, index funds, cash, or in the form of progress payments with GJs, and it's pretty satisfying knowing their net worth is slowly increasing over time, he said. We had a final check-in before I recorded this podcast, and their net worth as of mid-September 2024 was $673,000, which is amazing. I'm already predicting a future update episode for this couple, but my final questions to Chris for this one were, where to from here? Well, they want to move into their home, they want to pay it off fast and get back to index fund investing, which will get them back on track with their original mission statement. So that kind of brings you up to date with where Rosemary, Chris and their wee Peppy find themselves today. Financially and personally, they have come so far in such a short space of time. It really is so impressive. Now, before I wrap up, I've just got another quick message from today's sponsor. If your finances are holding you back from living the life you want, try PocketSmith out. They've got the tools to help you make money management easier. And have we got a deal for you? Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of PocketSmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/thehappysaver. That's pocketsmith.com/thehappysaver. 2024 has been busier than ever before for Rosemary and Chris, but I love that they keep coming up with new goals, adjusting them to fit, and they just keep cracking on. And when they overcook life in one area, they pivot, change direction, rework their plan to make life better for them. Rosemary said of their journey that it's been a crazy amount of work, but totally worth it, and the broad principles of the FIRE movement are working really well for them. She said that while they might be living on beans and rice at the moment, well, pretty soon they will have the freedom to live on beans and rice, but they might get to eat it while they're on holiday in Mexico. They are creating a really strong financial base to build on, one that will give them something that Chris often mentions, options. They both have So much to look forward to in the coming years, and I'm pretty excited for them. 2 great careers in the making, a beautiful wee baby, a home of their own, and a return to a region of New Zealand that they both love. I'm sure that they will continue to juggle their money about a bit until the build is complete and they lock in all their outgoings, whether that contains a mortgage or not, but you can be pretty sure that they will be tracking it somewhere. Now, counting themselves as optimists, which is one of the most helpful characteristics if you ask me, he referenced author Mark Manson by saying something along the lines of, "You are not defined by what you achieve, but rather the challenges you face and the perseverance you show." So, as we finish up today, his final words to me were, bring on the challenges that this next chapter has to offer, because I've no doubt that these two are up to the task. So once again, I wanted to thank both Chris and Rosemary for their openness and sharing their speedy journey of the last few years. And I really look forward to staying in touch with you both to see where your winding road leads you next. So that's all from me this week. If you want to get in touch, you know you can find me over at my blog, thehappysaver.com, where I share a lot of information about how I manage money in my life. Plus, if you sign up for my fortnightly email, I'm always linking to other useful personal finance blogs, podcasts, books, and content. So thanks for listening today. I hope you took a few nuggets of wisdom from this episode that you can now go and apply to your own life. And please do share The Happy Saver with your friends. It's still the best way that people can learn about the podcast. And I would love it if you would talk more about money with your own friends and whānau and help me continue to help others be better with money. So until next time, happy saving.